Today I'm going to be introducing you to an essential ingredient for movement in your tracks, and they're called LFOs. So without further ado, let's jump into it. First of all, what is an LFO? You might know that LFO stands for low frequency oscillator, and we use these things to change values of any parameter in our project, whatever that may be. We use LFOs to move them around automatically so you don't have to do it by hand. So moving around parameters, this process is called modulation. And so in knowing this, we use LFOs to modulate things. That's the general gist. So Exhibit A, I've got this pad here, let's check this out. Really nice, lush sounding pad. What I'm gonna do in this case is actually drag this onto a MIDI track, and it's gonna create a simpler for me. I'm gonna go into the controls, and as you can see here, this sort of wavy line is an LFO. And according to the shape of this line here is how it's gonna change whatever parameter we decide to assign it to. So let's assign it to the pitch and have a listen. If I was to do it to volume, this is how people get that sort of stuttering volume effect, right? We also have some different shapes here that we can assign. So we've got a square wave shape, which is gonna have really harsh edges. And then hitting this button here, we can also assign it to a value. So like a quarter of a bar, or even 3/4 of a bar, or even one whole bar. So I've pulled up Serum here now, and we can see we've got a triangle wave oscillator here. And we also have a triangle wave low frequency oscillator, or LFO. Now we're taught that an oscillator is something that generates a tone, right? And that is correct. But an LFO, on the other hand, we just use to modulate things. So linking all of these things together, the actual difference between an oscillator and an LFO is just the speed of the playback, or the speed at which it oscillates. So to demonstrate this, I'm actually gonna get this LFO and I'm gonna modulate the level with this. So now when I hit a note, we've got this. If I was to record this into audio, we can actually see the difference in rate between the low frequency oscillator and the regular oscillator. So this is the speed at which the low frequency oscillator is oscillating. It's doing it 4 times a bar. It's oscillating every quarter. But if I zoom in, you can actually see the triangle wave oscillation in there as well. So this is the rate at which the regular oscillator is oscillating. So you can see that oscillators are much quicker and LFOs are much slower. As you can see from this example, there's no point for us to use a regular oscillator to modulate something because it's going to be modulating it too fast for us to hear. But if we really slow down the oscillation, aka create a low frequency oscillator, then we can use that to create movement and modulate things in our track. So hopefully this makes sense. I like to think of it like this. We create sounds with oscillators and movement with modulators. I think that's a nice way to remember it. So how can we use LFOs in our tracks? LFOs are usually built into synths or sampler devices for us. Whenever we have an oscillator, there's usually some form of LFO modulation available as well. So we have this simpler device LFO in the controls panel, and in Serum we also have these 4 LFOs here. In Serum, when we want to assign an LFO to something, we just need to drag it onto the parameter and voila. You can see it's going to be modulating around, and then we can use this little circle up here to change the modulation amount. So this is the fun bit, because you can really assign LFOs to anything that you want. Maybe I want to assign an LFO over to this cutoff over here and bring that down. If you haven't done this before, I would highly recommend experimenting around in your synth, whatever it may be, just assigning LFOs to everything and anything and just seeing what it does. You can make really complex sounds just with LFOs. So I could go into the effects section and turn on a whole bunch of these different effects, and I can actually assign LFOs to any of these knobs here as well, right? Maybe let's assign it to the frequency amount, and now we're gonna have a band that's sort of moving around, right? That's pretty cool. Hey, by the way, if you are new to music production and you need a little bit of help getting your feet off the ground, I've linked a free EDM starter kit in the description below, so you can remember to grab that one if you want it. Don't forget we can also mess around with the LFO shape as well. In Serum, we have complete control over this. In other synths, you might have a little bit more limitation, but either way, you can still mess around with it, have some fun. I think that's a really cool sound. So after tidying up this project a little bit, we've got this result, right? All created from that serum patch that we were playing around with this LFO movement, right? If I go grab an auto filter, what you'll find is that on a whole bunch of these audio devices, you'll actually see there's a section for LFO as well. So this is going to be doing the exact same thing, but it's already mapped to the frequency position here. So if I turn this up, you can hear that this LFO is about to scan across the frequency spectrum like this. So what we're doing now is combining multiple LFOs together to create an interesting result. So this one has a really slow rate, and this one in here has a slightly faster rate with 1/4. So this is the general trick here. Using one LFO with one rate gives some elements movement, yes, but combining multiple LFOs together with different rates is where it starts to get a little bit more interesting. So I'm going to show you another way to use LFOs. This is probably the most versatile way. I'm going to grab a utility here as an example, but we can assign an LFO to modulate any parameter that we want via using this technique. So what I'm going to do is go to Max for Live and go into my Max Audio Effects and grab this LFO here and drag it on. So I've just got the drums and these chords playing here. And remember, we have that LFO built into the serum patch in here, and I'm going to use an LFO on this utility gain here to create some extra movement. So how this works is if I hit the map button, and whilst this is flashing, if I click on any knob here, if I click on this one, you can see that it's going to start modulating that knob according to the LFO. But we want to change this parameter here. If I was to hit play, it would boost it all the way up plus 35 decibels, and we really don't want that because it's going to explode our ears. So what you'll need to do is change this range up here. This range, if I set this to 50%, that's going to do 50% of whatever this knob is. So it's going to go up to 0 and then down to negative infinity. And you can change this rate here. So you can already have a lot of fun with that. I'm going to experiment around with some different shapes, maybe a square wave. So this is more or less just opening and closing, going between regular volume and complete silence. So now we can change and modulate this rate here, right? What I'm actually going to do is link it to the tempo. That's pretty cool. You can actually smoothen this as well. That's kind of like a sidechain effect, right? I like the 8th note ones, but it's not doing it in the right spot. So what I'm going to do is change this phase knob. This is where this phase knob comes in handy. So as I move this around, it's going to change where it opens and closes. So at 0%, sounds like this. As I move it up, I like that. We could add a little bit of smoothness. Maybe I'll try that with the bass line and see how that sounds now. Add the pads. So this to me sounds like it would be a good variation in the second half. So what if I want to modulate this utility to turn on about halfway through this section in here? So I'm going to right click this. show automation, and I'm actually going to modulate it to turn off in this section up here. So it's just going to be activated in the second half of this loop. Let's have a listen to this. So I hope this has helped you peek into the world of creative possibilities when it comes to LFOs. If you've enjoyed the video, remember to like and subscribe to the channel. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching. Stay safe, and I'll see you in the next one.